on Friday, the story broke that the federal government, the SEC, is going after Goldman Sachs. Now, they're not going after them in a criminal way. Nobody so far is going to go to jail. This may well just end up being the proverbial slap on the wrist. Here's a fine. Oh, that's the cost of doing business. The banksters at Goldman Sachs they just had their most profitable quarter in the 140-year history of the firm, and they're preparing to pay $5 billion in bonuses to their associates, to their employees right now as we speak. And yet at the same time, they're being charged with a variation on fraud for manufacturing products that they knew would explode, selling those products, and collaborating with this fellow, John Paulson, to manufacture these products in a way that would explode so that he could explicitly, so that he and his hedge fund investors could bet against them. And John walked away with almost $4 billion in money from that particular bet on that particular event. Nomi Prins is with us. Nomi is a former managing director at Goldman Sachs and ran the international analytics group at Bear Stearns in London. She's also a journalist and author of numerous books, including It Takes a Pillage, Behind the Bonuses, Bailouts, and Backroom Deals from Washington to Wall Street. Her website, Nomi, N-O-M-I, Prins, P-R-I-N-S.com. Nomi, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Tom. Good morning.
Good morning. You worked at Goldman Sachs. Is this the kind of thing, manufacturing exploding equities, that was... I mean, yesterday, on Friday, when this story first broke, the metaphor that I used, that later in the day I heard Dylan Ratigan, and I don't think he got it from me, I think it was just, it was an obvious thing. He far more eloquently elaborated on it. But basically I said, this is as if back in the 70s when Ford was making Pintos and they knew that they could make them a little safer, but it would cost a few extra dollars. They did a cost-benefit analysis and determined how many people would die, how much the lawsuits would cost, and that total amount of money was less than the cost of making the Pinto safe from a rear-end collision, and so they chose not to. And Ralph Nader outed them famously. And I said, this would be the same thing as if Ford had knowingly made cars that would kill people and then had gone out and bought a $100 million life insurance policy on every single person who bought a Pinto. And then when it paid off, that had become the major part of Ford's profit, and they had used that to compensate their CEOs. Is that metaphor, does that metaphor make any sense? And B, is this the kind of practice that when you were at Goldman, people knew was happening?
Well, first of all, it does make sense. Although I would add that it's as if the insurance policies were being paid out by the United States government via public funds. That's the part just to
That's
add.
The bailout of AIG, because AIG was the insurance company and they couldn't pay it out, and so we gave AIG the money that they then gave to Goldman and to Mr. Paulson.
Exactly. So they were basically they were hedged by us ultimately.
Right.
Whether they knew that or not, obviously, it's kind of a reach. I mean, they couldn't have possibly exactly known that would happen, but they sure did offlay that risk to AIG, and we ultimately wound up subsidizing it. So,
right.
So that did happen in that way. I mean, the whole thing is these types of transactions where you have a smart kind of savvy hedge fund on one side or private equity fund on one side, and you have what the firm would and I would and I think other people in the industry would say are less savvy, less sophisticated investors like IKB, like the fund that was actually, I believe, was named in the SEC suit, might have been the one, the bank that actually, was very angry about their almost, part of the $1 billion loss that they took when the CDO fell apart, which was a German bank. There's this notion that you're going to find people on both sides, and on one of the sides, they're going to be easier. It's sort of like walking into, it's sort of like if you're a guy or I guess girl, but mostly guy walking into a bar and you see someone who looks kind of a little slutty, and you might think they'd be easier than someone who looks a little bit more sophisticated, whether right or wrong. It's a little bit like that in terms of picking the other side. So you're always trying to pull the wool over one of the sides, whether it's each deal is different in terms of degrees. And in this particular case, what the main sticking point of the SEC's civil suit is, or civil charge is that the disclosure of who was on the other side of the trade, the smart guy, the Paulson and Company, the hedge fund, was not made available to the investor.
Right. In fact, according to the New York Times, they said that they looked over the marketing material that went with this particular fund that was designed by John Paulson. It was called Abacus.
Right.
And Abacus 2007-AC1.
Right.
And that those marketing materials explicitly said that an independent manager would be choosing the bonds that were put in there. Well, an independent manager was. That was John Paulson, right?
Well, that's the whole point. I've gone through the documents as well, the marketing team. And this is something that's very common to all of these trades, is that you get this, this lovely bunch of sheets of paper with diagrams about how the deal's going to look and why the management team is great, or why why the bonds have a certain, aura to them, or whatever it might be. It's a whole big pitch. And the management team that was the selection team was basically a combination of a guy from J.P. Morgan, from Merrill Lynch, from Ambac, from GE Capital, MBIA, and Sumitomo. None of those individuals or their companies were Paulson and Company, and that's the sticking point here.
Well,
however, I think one of the things that might happen out of this is that ultimately the management team did sign off on these bonds.
Right.
And that's going to be part of the sticking point, because Paulson, through emails and that were in the SEC charge, did say, okay, here's some bonds I want in them,
right.
Or I want to be referenced.
No,
and ACA said, well, actually, we were thinking about a lot of those ourselves.
No, we're talking with Nomi Prins. Nomi, we only have a minute left. A real quick question. Before the Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000, this 260-page piece of legislation that Phil Gramm slipped into the omnibus budget bill, this would have been illegal, wouldn't it?
It would have been illegal not to disclose the credit derivatives that were a part of this deal. This deal wasn't just the bonds. This deal was those bonds being replicated by something else, by credit derivatives, that without that lack of transparency and lack of regulation that was put into that bill would not have been as easy to put through. It wouldn't have been as easy to create this
So
deal
is it fair to say that Enron loophole that Phil Gramm put into legislation in 2000 and the removal of government oversight from commodity trading, led to this?
It did, in that it allowed credit derivatives to be more profitable and less regulated and transparent, and they were a big part of this.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Nomi Prins, NomiPrins.com, the website, her most recent book, It Takes a Pillage, Behind the Bonuses, Bailouts, and Backroom Deals from Washington to Wall Street. Thank you, Nomi, for dropping by.
Thank you.
Good talking with you.